It started like any ordinary day in 1985. A warm spring morning in a quiet neighborhood tucked away in rural Georgia. Birds chirped in the distance. The sun cast its golden light across the modest front porch of a small home, and neighbors went about their usual routines. But inside the Johnson family's house, something strange was happening. That day, without warning or explanation, an entire black family, a father, a mother, and two children, vanished without a trace. No signs of struggle. No goodbyes. No packed bags. Just gone. The Johnsons were well known in the community. Not wealthy, not flashy, but respected. George Johnson worked at a local auto shop and was the kind of man who helped folks change tires in the rain. His wife, Lillian, taught Sunday school at the Baptist church and made the best peach cobbler around. Their teenage daughter, April, was quiet but smart, and their younger son, Marcus, loved comic books and basketball. When they didn't show up for church that Sunday, people thought maybe they'd taken a short trip. But by Monday, when George didn't show up for work and Lillian missed her volunteer shift at the shelter, folks began to worry. By the end of the week, police were knocking on doors and search dogs combed the woods. The Johnson house was left untouched, lights still off, dinner plates still on the table. It was like they'd stepped out for groceries and never came back. But there were no credit card transactions. No sightings. No notes. Just silence. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. Eventually, the case faded from news headlines, and neighbors sadly accepted the painful mystery. The Johnson family had simply disappeared. Some believed they were targeted. Others whispered about foul play or witness protection. But no evidence ever emerged. 9 long years passed. Then, in 1994, a seemingly unrelated event in a busy city halfway across the country began to unravel the mystery, not with flashing sirens or breaking news, but with a small, quiet act of kindness. It happened on a rainy afternoon in Chicago. A crowded city bus made its usual crawl through traffic. Among the passengers was Jamal Thompson, a 16-year-old black high school student on his way home after his part-time job at the grocery store. Soaking wet from a storm and exhausted from school and work, Jamal barely noticed when a pregnant white woman boarded the bus, struggling to keep her balance. Without hesitation, he stood up and offered her a seat. She smiled, thanked him softly, and sat down. A few minutes later, as she was preparing to get off at the next stop, she slipped something into Jamal's hand. It wasn't money or a thank you card. It was a folded-up note. Confused, he watched her disappear into the rainy city before finally opening the paper. What he read made his hands tremble. It wasn't just a thank you. It was a message. A plea. A clue. The note read, "They're alive. They're still here. Trapped. The Johnsons. Basement. Don't trust anyone." Jamal didn't understand. Who were the Johnsons? What basement? Was this a prank? He almost threw the note away, but something about the woman's eyes, the fear behind her smile, made him pause. And that moment, that single second of hesitation, would set off a chain of events that would change his life forever and uncover one of the most chilling secrets buried in America's forgotten corners. Who was that woman? How did she know about a family that had vanished nearly a decade ago? And more importantly, what did she mean by trapped? As Jamal searched for answers, he would find himself pulled into a mystery that involved local police cover-ups, hidden rooms, and a terrifying truth that had been buried for years behind closed doors. A truth so dark, so unbelievable, that when it finally came to light, it left the entire nation in shock. But before that truth surfaced, Jamal had to make a choice. Ignore the note, or follow its clues and risk everything. And it all started with one simple act of kindness on a rainy day. What Jamal found next will leave you speechless. But that's where we'll pick up in the next part, because the real story, the one hidden behind the walls, is just getting started. Jamal couldn't stop thinking about the note. He unfolded it again and again that night, just staring at the shaky handwriting. The way the letters were slightly slanted, almost like the person writing had been rushing or scared. They're alive. They're still here. Trapped. The Johnsons. Basement. Don't trust anyone. He whispered it out loud, trying to make sense of it. His mother, tired from her nursing shift, called him for dinner, but he barely touched his food. Something about that note didn't feel like a joke. It felt real. The next day at school, Jamal asked around cautiously. He brought up the name Johnson's in conversation like it was random, like he'd heard it in a movie. Most kids just shrugged. But one of the lunch ladies, Mrs. Carlton, older, sweet, and always full of stories, paused when she heard the name. "You talking about the Johnson family from Georgia?" she asked slowly. "They disappeared back in the 80s. Never found. I remember it was on the news when I was younger. Whole family gone." It was one of those things that gave you chills. Jamal tried not to react, but his heart started racing. He went home that night and pulled out the old family laptop. It wasn't fast, but it worked. Typing Johnson family missing 1985 Georgia into the search bar, Jamal didn't expect much. But the screen lit up with a few old articles, digitized newspaper clippings, grainy photos, and a few archived police statements. There they were, George, Lillian, April, and Marcus Johnson. Their faces stared back at him from the screen, frozen in time. April looked about his age. Marcus, even younger. Reading through the articles, it was like something out of a mystery novel. No signs of forced entry. No clear leads. Just speculation. Some thought the family had run away. Others suspected they were murdered and hidden somewhere never to be found. But the odd thing was, there were no criminal records, no debt, no family disputes. Nothing. Just a clean, quiet life. And then, silence. A few threads online mentioned theories. One user speculated they were victims of human trafficking, another believed in a government cover-up. But there was nothing solid. Nothing that could explain why a woman in 1994 on a rainy bus ride in Chicago would hand a stranger a note about a family missing for nearly a decade. Jamal knew he couldn't keep this to himself. But the line in the note echoed in his head. Don't trust anyone. He thought about going to the police, but what if that woman had a reason for warning him against it? What if she'd tried to speak out before and been ignored, or worse? He couldn't shake the image of her face. Tired eyes, a tight smile, like someone who had lived with a secret for too long. Still, he needed help. That night, Jamal sat down with his grandmother, the only person he felt he could trust completely. Nana May was old school, but sharp. She always said, people may lie, but energy never does. When Jamal showed her the note, she didn't laugh or brush it off. She just stared at it, quiet. I knew a Johnson family, she finally said. Don't know if they're the same, but they lived down south. Folks said they just disappeared one day. Your uncle even helped look for them. That got Jamal's attention. His uncle Ronnie used to be a truck driver, always on the road, always talking about strange things he saw in small towns and back roads. When Jamal asked him about the Johnsons, Ronnie's face went still. Boy, that's a name I haven't heard in years, he said. Yeah, I remember that case. Whole town was off after it happened. Quiet. Nervous. Cops didn't say much, and people didn't ask questions. But I always felt like something was being covered up. Like somebody knew more than they were letting on. Jamal asked him if he thought the family could still be alive. Ronnie didn't answer right away. I don't know, he said slowly. But I wouldn't put it past some folks to keep others hidden. You'd be surprised what people are capable of when they've got something to lose. The words stuck with Jamal. That weekend, he took the city bus route back to the same stop where he'd met the woman. He waited. For hours. Hoping she might appear again. But she never did. He looked around, tried to remember which direction she went after stepping off the bus. It was hard, everything had happened so fast. But there was something. He remembered her looking back once, briefly, as if to make sure he was reading the note. The following week, he went to the public library. He asked the librarian for help searching property records. At first, it seemed random. But then, buried deep in some records from the late 80s, Jamal found a real estate document. A house listed under a different name, but the address matched one of the articles about the Johnson family. It had been bought just months after their disappearance. And oddly, the buyer used a company name, not a person's. A shell company, registered to a post office box in Chicago. That couldn't be a coincidence. Jamal kept digging, notebook full of clues, connections, names. He started noticing things. A man in a gray car parked outside his building 2 days in a row. A strange call on the landline where no one spoke. He tried telling himself it was just his imagination, but deep down he felt it. Someone didn't want the story uncovered. And yet, there was no turning back. The more he learned, the more questions surfaced. If the Johnsons were truly trapped somewhere, why? Who would do that, and for what reason? Was it about race, or something darker? Had they seen something they weren't supposed to? Or was there a family secret someone had gone to disturbing lengths to protect? One night, Jamal sat staring at the photo of April Johnson again. Her eyes seemed to speak through the years, like she was still out there, waiting, hoping someone would care enough to look, to not give up. That's when he made a decision. He didn't know where this would lead, but he wasn't stopping until he found the truth. Because someone had reached out. Someone risked a lot just to pass a note. That had to mean something. And even if it took him into dangerous territory, Jamal knew in his heart, it wasn't just a mystery anymore. It was a mission. But as he would soon learn, the deeper he went, the closer he got to the truth. There were people watching. And the truth? The truth was more twisted than he ever imagined. The days that followed felt like something out of a movie. Jamal kept a low profile, but his thoughts were loud and constant. He didn't know who to trust, not after what he was uncovering. There was too much that didn't add up. The property records, the fake company names, and that woman. Who was she really? Why would she carry that kind of information for so long and pass it to a teenager on a bus? And how could the Johnsons still be alive after all this time? The deeper he went, the more the mystery clawed at him. Jamal started using the computers at school more carefully, clearing browser history, using incognito mode, and writing everything down by hand. He even stopped bringing his phone places just in case. It felt paranoid, but something told him it was necessary. Meanwhile, he started making trips back to that neighborhood in Chicago near the post office box listed in the records. It wasn't a nice part of town. It felt hollow, like a place people moved through, not one they stayed in. But there were eyes there. People on stoops, quiet kids on bikes, and old men sipping coffee and saying nothing. One of those men caught Jamal watching a building and walked over. He looked like he'd seen too much in his life, the kind of person who didn't waste words. "You keep looking up at that window like you expected to look back," the man said without smiling. Jamal paused. He didn't answer right away. "I'm trying to find somebody," he finally said. "I think they were kept here or near here. A long time ago." The man didn't blink. He lit a cigarette and looked out across the street. "People don't get lost," he said after a pause. "They get hidden. On purpose." That stuck with Jamal. Meanwhile, strange things were happening at school. His locker was broken into. Twice. Nothing was stolen, but it had clearly been tampered with. A substitute teacher showed up in one of his classes, but no one remembered asking for a sub. She kept looking at him. His grandmother's mailbox was pried open one morning, and a neighbor reported seeing someone in a dark hoodie walking past the apartment more than once at night. Something was shifting. He hadn't told anyone about the building he'd found, not even Nana May. And yet, someone seemed to know what he was doing. The tension at home was building too. His mom noticed he was quieter, staying up late, not eating much. She tried to talk to him, but he brushed her off. She worked long hours and was already stressed. He didn't want to bring her into something she couldn't walk away from. But one night, she left a note by his plated dinner. It said, *, "You're not alone. Whatever's happening, be careful. I see it in your eyes. Just promise me you won't go too far." *, he folded the note into his wallet. He didn't have the heart to tell her that too far had already passed. Jamal began piecing together a map. The Johnsons' original home in Georgia, the shell company in Chicago, and the warehouse district near the bus stop where he met the woman, they formed a rough triangle. It made no real sense geographically or logically, but there was a pattern in how disconnected it was. Like someone wanted to keep attention scattered. Then something unexpected happened. One of the police files Jamal had printed out from a public archive included a name he hadn't noticed before, Detective Charles Renton. He had been one of the original officers on the Johnson case back in 1985. According to the report, Renton had filed 2 separate statements about the disappearance. The first claimed there were no suspicious signs. The second, filed weeks later, was sealed. Jamal found an old address and decided to go check it out. The man who opened the door was in his 70s, hunched, wearing a robe. When Jamal asked if he was Detective Renton, the man gave a weak smile. "Not anymore," he said. Jamal didn't lie. He told the truth about the note, about the Johnson family, about how he found the property files. Renton's expression shifted. He looked afraid but also relieved. "I try to tell someone," he whispered. "I filed a second report. My captain told me to bury it. Said it wasn't our business anymore."
Jamal asked why.
Renton hesitated, then said something that made Jamal's stomach drop. "They weren't missing," Renton said. "They were taken." Jamal asked by who. Renton just shook his head. You don't ask questions like that in a small town where everyone knows each other, especially when the sheriff's brother owns half the land. Jamal pushed. "Where were they taken? Why would anyone hide a family?" Renton looked away. "Because they knew something. Or maybe they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. All I know is I saw a man once years later. Thought it was George Johnson. He looked right at me. Didn't say a word. Just got in a car and drove off. Like he wasn't allowed to talk." Jamal left with more questions than answers. But one thing was certain. This wasn't just a missing persons case. It was something darker. Something with layers. Maybe the Johnsons had witnessed something, or maybe someone wanted to make sure their silence was permanent. But if they were still alive, that meant someone had kept them locked away for years. He started researching other families in the same area who had disappeared under strange circumstances. There were a few cases. A woman and her daughter who vanished in '83. A man who worked construction and was found in the woods, burned. None were ever solved. There was a pattern of silence. No investigations that went anywhere, like people were told to stop looking. Meanwhile, Jamal couldn't get the image of April Johnson out of his mind. She would be about 28 now. If she were alive, what kind of life had she been forced to live? What had she seen? What had she lost? The weight of it all felt heavier with each step he took. But he wasn't turning back. Something was happening, something deep beneath the surface, and he was starting to see how big it really was. But just as he was beginning to put things together, someone left a note outside his apartment door. "Stop digging. You've been warned. Asterisk, asterisk." And suddenly Jamal knew. He was no longer just chasing a mystery. He was being hunted by it. Jamal stood in the hallway, staring at the folded paper on the floor like it had teeth. The warning wasn't vague, it was cold, direct, and personal. The handwriting was printed in block letters, almost too neat. It sent a chill straight through him. For the first time, he thought seriously about stopping. About walking away before something happened that couldn't be undone. But then he thought about April Johnson. He thought about a little girl who had vanished at 4 years old and may have lived every day since in a place where sunlight didn't reach. That image alone burned away his fear. That night, he didn't sleep. He went through every document again, double-checked his notes, tried to connect every. There was something just out of reach, like a puzzle piece that kept slipping under the table. That triangle, the Georgia home, the shell company in Chicago, and that rusted-out warehouse, it was too deliberate to be random. Something connected them. Somewhere in that triangle, a decision had been made to make a whole family disappear. And someone had been keeping it quiet ever since. Jamal went back to the warehouse. It was a cold morning, mist rising off the cracked pavement, turning everything gray and ghost-like. The structure was barely holding together, boarded windows, metal siding peeling. He climbed the fence and slipped through the side door, heart pounding harder with every step. The air inside smelled like mildew and rust. The first floor was empty except for dust, broken pallets, and silence. But in the back, past a rusted-out stairwell, he saw something new. A steel door. One that hadn't been there the last time. It was partially open. Jamal reached out and touched it. The metal was ice cold. He pushed slowly, every sound magnified in the stillness. Beyond the door was a dark hallway, no lights, no windows. He took out his flashlight and stepped inside. The walls were concrete, thick. The deeper he walked, the quieter the world felt. No echoes, no outside noise. Just the steady sound of his own breathing. And then he heard it. A cough. It was soft.
Faint.
But it was real. He froze. Listened harder. Another cough, followed by a whisper. His flashlight flicked left, catching the edge of a wooden panel. It wasn't a real wall. It had hinges, a padlock that had been broken, and a handle. Jamal's heart felt like it was in his throat. He reached out, turned the handle, and opened the hidden door. And that's when he saw them. 3 people. A man, a woman, and a woman around his age. Their eyes squinted at the light, their faces pale, hollow. The older man stepped forward slowly, his voice barely a whisper. "Are you from the outside?" Jamal nodded, stunned silent. The woman clutched her daughter. No, not a daughter. She was April. He knew it immediately. Even older, even thinner, those eyes were the same from the photo. April stared at him like he was from another world. Before he could say anything else, the man said something Jamal wasn't ready for. "They're coming back." Jamal helped them move quickly. They had bags packed, small, dirty duffels with barely anything inside. The father said they hadn't left that space in years. They were fed occasionally but never spoken to. Someone had been keeping them alive but imprisoned. It wasn't just about hiding them, it was about control. As they moved through the hallway, back toward the exit, Jamal heard the sharp creak of the outer steel door slam shut. Whoever had locked them up had returned. The warehouse turned into a trap. They darted through shadows, hearts pounding, April holding her mother's hand tightly. Jamal stayed ahead, leading them through broken sections of wall and finally out through the side door where he had entered. But just as they reached the fence, headlights turned on. A black SUV was parked just beyond the lot, its engine silent, lights glaring like eyes. Jamal didn't wait. He helped the Johnsons climb over the fence one by one. As he reached the top, the SUV door opened. A man stepped out. No uniform. No words. Just a cold stare. Jamal didn't look back again. They ran into the streets, disappearing down an alley. Every step was filled with fear. Every second, Jamal expected to hear a gunshot or footsteps behind them. But somehow, they made it to the L station. Jamal bought tickets with cash, led the Johnsons onto a nearly empty train car, and sat with them as the doors closed. His hands were shaking, his mind racing. The Johnsons didn't say much. They looked around like they'd landed on another planet. April didn't speak at all. She just stared out the window as the city rushed past, her reflection blurred by motion. Jamal pulled his hoodie up, head low, scanning the car for anyone watching. He knew this wasn't over. Whoever was behind this wasn't going to let them go easily. He didn't have answers yet. He didn't know how far this reached, who was funding the silence, who was threatening him, and now chasing them. But one thing was clear. Someone had gone to great lengths to keep the Johnsons hidden. And now that they were out, someone else would do anything to put them back. As the train rumbled forward into the darkness of the tunnel, Jamal's phone buzzed. One new message. No name. Just a number he didn't recognize. "You shouldn't have done that." He looked up. Someone on the train was watching. The train rattled deeper into the tunnel, fluorescent lights flickering overhead, casting everyone in a ghostly glow. Jamal's heart thudded in his chest as he scanned the faces in the nearly empty car. There were only 5 other passengers, most of them hunched over their phones or lost in thought. But there was one man, sitting at the far end, who hadn't taken his eyes off Jamal since they boarded. No phone, no book, just a stillness that felt wrong. Too focused, too deliberate. Jamal didn't say anything out loud, but he leaned slightly toward Mr. Johnson, trying to stay calm. "Don't look now," he whispered, "but someone might be following us." Mr. Johnson didn't react, just gave the faintest nod. Jamal clenched his jaw. The Johnsons had been trapped for nearly a decade. If they were being followed already, it meant the people who held them hadn't wasted any time. When the train slowed at the next stop, the man at the far end didn't move. He stayed planted, watching them as the doors opened and closed. Jamal exhaled, hoping they'd lose him in the tunnel's confusion. But as the train started up again, His phone buzzed once more.
A picture this time.
Grainy, taken from across the platform. It was of Jamal standing with the Johnsons just minutes ago. Too late to back out. We know who they are. We know who you are. Asterisk, asterisk. That was the moment Jamal realized this wasn't just about one missing family. This was bigger. The Johnsons weren't just victims. They were witnesses. They had seen something or someone that wasn't supposed to be seen. Maybe in that house back in Georgia. Maybe later, wherever they were moved. But it explained why someone went to such extremes to keep them locked away. And now, Jamal wasn't just helping escapees. He was the leak in a decades-old secret. They got off at the next station, climbing the stairs two at a time, emerging into cold daylight. The city looked normal, but Jamal felt the weight of invisible eyes. He called a rideshare using a burner app, directing it to a motel far out in the suburbs. Somewhere they wouldn't be expected to go. As they drove, the Johnsons sat silently in the back seat. April finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. They said we were special, that we knew too much. I didn't understand what they meant back then, but I think I do now. Jamal turned in his seat. What did you see, April? She looked away, tears forming in the corners of her eyes. People that weren't supposed to be there. Government people. And money. So much money. They made Dad sign something. Then we weren't allowed outside anymore. Then we weren't allowed to talk. One day, they just stopped saying anything at all. Mr. Johnson looked down, ashamed. I thought I could protect them. I thought if I agreed to what they wanted, they'd just let us live quietly. But the truth was, they never planned to let us live freely again. Jamal stared out the window as the car passed rows of gray apartment buildings. This wasn't about immigration or some witness protection gone wrong. This had the scent of something deeper. Blackmail. Corruption. A cover-up that had gone too far. And now he was in it. They arrived at the motel and slipped inside without a word. Jamal paid cash and avoided cameras. But even as they entered the room, locked the door, and pulled the curtains, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He opened his laptop to research the Johnsons again, looking for anything, court records, company ties, government contracts. That's when he stumbled across a name buried in a document about the original investigation into their disappearance. Langford and Miller Consulting. It was listed as a logistics partner for the shell company that had owned the Johnsons' old home. Jamal didn't think much of it until he searched the company name. What he found was chilling. Langford and Miller wasn't just some consulting firm. It was a contractor with deep ties to federal agencies, including Homeland Security and private detention centers. And at the time of the Johnsons' disappearance, they were running operations in Georgia under an experimental housing grant. And then another name popped up. Agent Ellis Reeve. He'd been one of the original investigators on the Johnsons' case. Officially, he retired in 1991. Unofficially, he had gone on to become a private security advisor for Langford and Miller.
There were rumors about him.
Whispers on forums. A man who specialized in containment. A man who had never left a paper trail but had been linked to several quiet disappearances over the years. Jamal leaned back, stunned. Agent Reeve wasn't just connected. He might have been the one who orchestrated the Johnsons' entire disappearance. The door suddenly creaked. Jamal jumped up, motioning for the Johnsons to stay quiet. He approached the door slowly and looked through the peephole. No one. But something was slipped under the door. Another envelope. Inside was a single photo. A grainy surveillance shot of Jamal's mother, leaving her job that afternoon. On the back, one line was written. You're not the only one with family. His hands started to tremble. The stakes had just changed. It wasn't just about helping the Johnsons anymore. Now it was personal. Now they were threatening his world. Whoever these people were, they had reach. And they were ruthless. Jamal turned to the Johnsons. We need to disappear.
Now.
But Mr. Johnson didn't move. There's something you should know, he said, looking at April and then back at Jamal. Before they took us underground, they showed me something. Something they said they'd use if we ever told anyone. It wasn't just about us. It was about others like us. Families. Entire groups. I thought they were lying. But now /. I think there may be more people still hidden. Just like we were. Jamal felt the air thicken. More? The thought of others, entire families still trapped, still unknown, made his heart race. What he had uncovered was only the edge of something much, much larger. The room fell silent, the low hum of a car engine passing by the only sound. They were in danger, but they were also holding the key to a secret someone was willing to bury forever. And Jamal was beginning to realize this wasn't just a rescue mission. This was a war for the truth. The wind outside the motel howled as night settled over the city. Inside, Jamal paced the floor, his mind racing. The photo of his mother was still on the table, a cruel reminder of how far this conspiracy reached. Across the room, April and Mr. Johnson sat close together, both drained but alert. Jamal knew they couldn't stay here. Not another hour. But more than that, he knew they couldn't just run anymore. They had to expose the truth, whatever it took. Using an encrypted drive, Jamal uploaded every document, photo, and video he had collected. Government files, property records, the Langford and Miller connections, everything. He prepared an anonymous drop to multiple media outlets, then set a timed release just in case something happened to him. But one piece was still missing. Agent Ellis Reeve. If they could get him on camera, or if he slipped even once, it could break the entire operation wide open. But how? They couldn't go to him. They'd have to draw him out. Jamal had a plan, but it would take everything. He posted a cryptic message on an old forum where Reeve had been mentioned. The Johnsons are alive. I have proof. Let's trade. He left coordinates in an abandoned part of the city, an old warehouse once used as a train depot. Dangerous, yes. But it was open, public enough to catch attention if anything went wrong. As expected, it didn't take long. Less than 4 hours later, he received a single message in reply. Come alone. Midnight. When the clock struck 12, Jamal stood alone in the middle of the vast, shadowy warehouse, clutching the briefcase with the original evidence. The air was cold and thick with silence. Then a car pulled up. Headlights swept across the walls. A figure stepped out slowly, tall, dressed in black, and wearing a headset. It was Reeve. Older now, but unmistakable. His voice was calm, almost casual. I figured someone would try digging eventually, but I didn't think it'd be a kid. Jamal didn't flinch. Why them? Why trap an innocent family? Reeve took a few steps forward. It was never personal. It was about control. The Johnsons saw something they weren't meant to. A list of names, agents, operations, things the government needed kept quiet. At first, the plan was simple. Relocate them, keep them monitored. But then they started asking questions. Getting bold. We couldn't risk a leak. Jamal shook his head. So you buried them alive? Reeve's voice dropped. It worked, didn't it? Until now. From the shadows, Mr. Johnson stepped out slowly, followed by April. Reeve's eyes widened. For a brief moment, his calm cracked. You brought them, he barked. Jamal lifted the briefcase. We're not running. We're exposing you. Suddenly, more headlights flooded the warehouse. Dozens of figures in black tactical gear appeared, but they weren't with Reeve. They were reporters, private investigators, and civil rights attorneys, people Jamal had contacted. The timed release had triggered early. Cameras were rolling. Microphones were hot. Reeve froze. His voice turned sharp. Turn those off. This isn't over. Jamal stepped forward.
No.
It's finally over. The agents that Reeve had called as backup arrived just moments too late, only to find themselves surrounded by press and attorneys. Mr. Johnson handed over the original list of names, which had been copied and stored across multiple drives. It exposed a network of detainments, false identities, and secret facilities operated under the guise of national security. Within days, federal investigations were launched. Reeve was arrested for unlawful detainment, conspiracy, and obstruction. Langford and Miller's leadership resigned in disgrace. The Johnson family, once vanished and forgotten, became the face of one of the biggest cover-up scandals in recent American history. But just when it seemed the dust had settled, Jamal received a letter in his mailbox with no return address. Inside was a single flash drive and a note that read, "You only uncovered one layer.
They're still out there.
Keep digging." The flash drive contained footage grainy and dark, but clear enough to see. It showed another family, in another house, a different state, another trap. Jamal stared at the screen, heart pounding. He realized the battle wasn't over. It had just begun. And now, someone out there wanted his help again. The truth had been buried once. But not this time. Not anymore. Jamal sat quietly on the back porch of the Johnsons' temporary home. The evening sky glowed with soft amber light as the sun began to set, and for the first time, in what felt like forever, the world was still. It had only been 2 weeks since the warehouse incident, but everything had changed. The story had exploded across national news. The vanished black family found alive after 9 years in hidden room. Whistleblower teen exposes government conspiracy. Headlines like that had filled every major outlet, and Jamal's name had become synonymous with bravery. Despite the media frenzy, Jamal stayed out of the spotlight as much as he could. It wasn't about fame. It was about justice. The Johnsons, after years of silence, were finally free. April had begun her therapy journey, and Mr. Johnson had reconnected with a few extended relatives. Slowly, painfully, they were learning how to exist outside of the fear they'd lived in for nearly a decade. Mrs. Johnson, though she was gone, her body had never been recovered from the site where the hidden bunker collapsed during a botched maintenance attempt by the government long ago. It was something they would all carry with them, an ache that no amount of truth could ever erase. Jamal glanced down at the flash drive again. The second family on the video had haunted him ever since he watched it. No names. No location. Just a blurry face of a child peeking through a cracked door. Someone else was trapped. And whoever sent the footage knew he'd feel compelled to act. Before anything else, Jamal needed answers. Why was he chosen? Why him, a regular teen just trying to help someone on a train? It went back to that small, selfless moment when he gave up his seat for a pregnant woman. That woman turned out to be a journalist, one who had been quietly investigating missing persons cases and stumbled across something strange about the Johnson file. Her note to Jamal wasn't just a thank you, it was a lifeline to a mystery that too many people had ignored. It was like fate had tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Pay attention." The public reaction to the Johnson story had been intense. There was outrage, of course, but also unity. People protested peacefully. Petitions demanded accountability. Survivors from other secret operations started coming forward, some afraid, some furious. Whistleblowers revealed hidden records of similar detainments. Civil liberties groups took legal action. And Congress, under enormous pressure, launched a formal investigation into the classified detainment programs overseen by rogue agencies. As the legal wheels began turning, Reeve was officially indicted on multiple federal charges. His trial was set to begin within the year, and though he remained mostly silent in custody, the media leaked portions of his internal testimony. He'd referred to people like the Johnsons as controlled liabilities, showing no remorse. But even behind bars, Reeve still had connections. And that meant the network behind the scenes wasn't completely shut down. Meanwhile, the Langford and Miller firm was dissolved under court order. Dozens of clients pulled out. Their private security licenses were revoked. What had once looked like a respectable law office had been a front for relocating families who posed a risk to unnamed agencies. Many of the firm's employees claimed they had no knowledge of the darker side of the operation. A few disappeared before they could be questioned. The Johnsons eventually chose not to go back to their old home. Too many memories. Too much pain. Instead, they moved to a quiet suburb in a different state with new identities for safety, but they remained in contact with Jamal. He'd become more than the kid who discovered their truth. He was like family now. And then there was the question of Jamal's future. Colleges reached out. Media offers flooded in. But he kept most of it at arm's length. He had started something, and he felt a responsibility to see it through. Using the momentum from the Johnson case, he launched a digital investigative project, Hidden Lives. It was a small online platform built to share stories of the disappeared, the ignored, and the wrongly detained. Within weeks, it went viral. Families from across the country submitted tips, shared files, even old newspaper clippings. One post led to the reopening of a cold case from 1992. Another brought a falsely imprisoned man home after 20 years. Through all of this, one truth stuck with Jamal. Even a small act of kindness can change someone's life. If he hadn't stood up on that train, if he hadn't read that note, he might never have learned about the Johnsons. And that simple gesture, giving up a seat, ended up bringing justice, healing, and a new path for so many others. Still, there were hard days. Days when the weight of everything caught up to him. Days when the memory of Mrs. Johnson's quiet voice or April's shaking hands reminded him of the cost of the truth. But he never regretted getting involved. He knew now that silence was complicity, that justice sometimes needs just one voice to begin. On a cold evening just before winter, Jamal finally plugged in the second flash drive again. He watched the video, paused it frame by frame, looking for clues. The wallpaper, the door handle, a street sign briefly visible through a window. This was the beginning of something new, another truth waiting to be uncovered. He turned to the camera on his desk, pressed record, and began to speak. "My name is Jamal Carter. A few months ago, I helped bring a family back from the shadows. But their story wasn't the only one. There's another. And I think they need our help. So, if you're watching this, pay attention. Because someone out there is still missing. And, together, we're going to find them." As the screen faded to black, the final frame held a simple message. Truth never stays buried. And that's how it ended. At least for now. One story closed, another just beginning. A reminder that in a world full of noise and distractions, sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power. And sometimes, the smallest act of kindness can unravel the biggest lies. Jamal sat quietly on the back porch of the Johnsons' temporary home. The evening sky glowed with soft amber light as the sun began to set, and for the first time, in what felt like forever, the world was still. It had only been 2 weeks since the warehouse incident, but everything had changed. The story had exploded across national news. The vanished black family found alive after 9 years in hidden room. Whistleblower teen exposes government conspiracy. Headlines like that had filled every major outlet, and Jamal's name had become synonymous with bravery. Despite the media frenzy, Jamal stayed out of the spotlight as much as he could. It wasn't about fame. It was about justice. The Johnsons, after years of silence, were finally free. April had begun her therapy journey, and Mr. Johnson had reconnected with a few extended relatives. Slowly, painfully, they were learning how to exist outside of the fear they'd lived in for nearly a decade. Mrs. Johnson, though she was gone, her body had never been recovered from the site where the hidden bunker collapsed during a botched maintenance attempt by the government long ago. It was something they would all carry with them, an ache that no amount of truth could ever erase. Jamal glanced down at the flash drive again. The second family on the video had haunted him ever since he watched it. No names. No location. Just a blurry face of a child peeking through a cracked door. Someone else was trapped. And whoever sent the footage knew he'd feel compelled to act. Before anything else, Jamal needed answers. Why was he chosen? Why him, a regular teen just trying to help someone on a train? It went back to that small, selfless moment when he gave up his seat for a pregnant woman. That woman turned out to be a journalist, one who had been quietly investigating missing persons cases and stumbled across something strange about the Johnson file. Her note to Jamal wasn't just a thank you. It was a lifeline to a mystery that too many people had ignored. It was like fate had tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Pay attention." The public reaction to the Johnson story had been intense. There was outrage, of course, but also unity. People protested peacefully. Petitions demanded accountability. Survivors from other secret operations started coming forward, some afraid, some furious. Whistleblowers revealed hidden records of similar detainments. Civil liberties groups took legal action. And Congress, under enormous pressure, launched a formal investigation into the classified detainment programs overseen by rogue agencies. As the legal wheels began turning, Reeve was officially indicted on multiple federal charges. His trial was set to begin within the year, and though he remained mostly silent in custody, the media leaked portions of his internal testimony. He'd refer to people like the Johnsons as controlled liabilities, showing no remorse. But even behind bars, Reeve still had connections. And that meant the network behind the scenes wasn't completely shut down. Meanwhile, the Langford and Miller firm was dissolved under court order. Dozens of clients pulled out. Their private security licenses were revoked. What had once looked like a respectable law office had been a front for relocating families who posed a risk to unnamed agencies. Many of the firm's employees claimed they had no knowledge of the darker side of the operation. A few disappeared before they could be questioned. The Johnsons eventually chose not to go back to their old home. Too many memories. Too much pain. Instead, they moved to a quiet suburb in a different state with new identities for safety, but they remained in contact with Jamal. He'd become more than the kid who discovered their truth. He was like family now. And then there was the question of Jamal's future. Colleges reached out. Media offers flooded in. But he kept most of it at arm's length. He had started something, and he felt a responsibility to see it through. Using the momentum from the Johnson case, he launched a digital investigative project, Hidden Lives. It was a small online platform built to share stories of the disappeared, the ignored, and the wrongly detained. Within weeks, it went viral. Families from across the country submitted tips, shared files, even old newspaper clippings. One post led to the reopening of a cold case from 1992. Another brought a falsely imprisoned man home after 20 years. Through all of this, one truth stuck with Jamal. Even a small act of kindness can change someone's life. If he hadn't stood up on that train, if he hadn't read that note, he might never have learned about the Johnsons. And that simple gesture, giving up a seat, ended up bringing justice, healing, and a new path for so many others. Still, there were hard days. Days when the weight of everything caught up to him. Days when the memory of Mrs. Johnson's quiet voice or April's shaking hands reminded him of the cost of the truth. But he never regretted getting involved. He knew now that silence was complicity, that justice sometimes needs just one voice to begin. On a cold evening just before winter, Jamal finally plugged in the second flash drive again. He watched the video, paused it frame by frame, looking for clues. The wallpaper, the door handle, a street sign briefly visible through a window. This was the beginning of something new, another truth waiting to be uncovered. He turned to the camera on his desk, pressed record, and began to speak. My name is Jamal Carter. A few months ago, I helped bring a family back from the shadows. But their story wasn't the only one. There's another. And I think they need our help. So, if you're watching this, pay attention. Because someone out there is still missing. And together, we're going to find them. As the screen faded to black, the final frame held a simple message. Truth never stays buried. And that's how it ended. At least for now. One story closed, another just beginning. A reminder that in a world full of noise and distractions, sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power. And sometimes, the smallest act of kindness can unravel the biggest lies.